Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. In this episode, we are going to look at Sino-Indian relations and the various aspects where India and China can move the relationship forward. Earlier this week, the special representatives of the government of India and China met in New Delhi to look at how to resolve the long-standing boundary dispute and how to continue to maintain peace on the LAC and the disputed boundary.
As India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval met up with the Chinese State Councillor Yang Jiechi, his counterpart, for the 18th round of boundary talks, apparently to find a resolution for the territories under occupation on the basis of the 2005 guiding principles to leave settled populations as they are. The focus of both sides has been to keep the LAC peaceful. Encroachment by Chinese troops in Ladakh last year became an embarrassment for the Chinese president on his much-publicized visit to India. China eventually withdrew its troops, but the disagreements on the boundary remain. India's position is that its northern borders stretch from northwest tip of Jammu and Kashmir, the tri-junction of India, Afghanistan and China, to the northeast of Arunachal Pradesh or tri-junction of India, China, Myanmar. Total of 3,488 kilometers. The Chinese claim is that the Indian boundary starts from west of Karakoram Pass, with India in adverse possession of 500 square kilometers land in Demchok in eastern Ladakh, which their troops encroached upon last year. And Beijing also lays claim to Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, which it regards as part of southern Tibet. Only the central sector of the boundary west of Nepal is uncontested by China, for which it has agreed to exchange maps. But with China seeking major land concessions in both the western and eastern sectors, as Beijing claims 70,000 square kilometers of land in Arunachal Pradesh, New Delhi believes that the Chinese army is still in occupation of 94 square kilometers of land near Sikkim, in Namkachu, Samdrongchu and Longchu, the battlefields of the 1962 war. China's strategy towards all its boundary disputes is based on making big territorial claims to put its rivals on the defensive. However, optimists feel that both sides could move forward by focusing more on trade and investments, with the aim of moving Sino-India bilateral trade to the $100 billion figure soon. But that can only happen if Beijing softens its stand on the age-old boundary dispute. Clearly, there is a lot of ground to cover before Prime Minister Narendra Modi undertakes his first visit to China next month.
Clearly, the boundary dispute between the two countries is going to take a long time before both countries come around to a settlement, because 18 rounds of talks haven't got us too far as yet. But what could really turn the tide in Sino-Indian relations is the hope for much bigger economic cooperation between the two countries, and Mr. Modi's forthcoming visit to China could have some surprise for those who have written off the relationship between the two countries as purely border-related rivalry. We have with us two guests today. We have Professor Srikanth Kondapalli from Jawaharlal Nehru University, who is the key person in their JNU's China program and a long-standing observer of China, and General Dipankar Banerjee, once again a strategic affairs expert who has been looking at China and has been involved on various issues, including visits to China about Sino-Indian relations, currently the head of the Forum for Strategic Initiatives and also the founding director of the IPCS. Professor Kondapalli, my first question to you. Why is there such a departure between Beijing's view and Delhi's view based on the historical baggage we both have inherited on the boundary dispute?
I think there is this incompatibility between the Chinese view and the Indian view on the territorial dispute. China's position is very inconsistent when it came to what they call as unequal treaties. They said McMahon Line is an unequal treaty, but the 1895 Sino-Vietnamese Convention, which was drawn between the Qing dynasty and the French Empire, that was not treated as an unequal treaty. In other words, this is the incompatible view between the two sides. From the Chinese point of view, there has been a disjuncture in their views regarding the territorial dispute.
General Banerjee, this is clearly the point where I think the relationship is stuck. You've been one of the earlier movers in this whole initiative of boundary talks. Where is there a point where we can both meet? We know where the departure points are, but where is the meeting point? Is there a possible meeting point between the two countries?
On the question of the borders in the eastern sector, which is along the Himalayas, the watershed on the high Himalayas are a very defining area for separating the two countries' influences, the Tibetan Plateau in the north and India in the south. And the high ridge on the Himalayas actually define the territorial jurisdiction of either side. Of course, in different times in history, these have either been delineated, agreed upon, or perhaps left to the vagaries of nature in the past. Historically, boundaries were never clearly delineated on the ground, always seldom delineated on the ground. It is a post-Westphalian situation when nation states became to be established in the natural system, and then the boundaries became important.
I just want to come in once again, Professor Kandapalli, that China claims about 7,000 square kilometers of territory in India's east, Arunachal particularly, and their real sore point is Tawang, and they claim it's part of southern Tibet. What is really China's position now? Because I understand from 2003, 2005 onwards, it was agreed that neither side will claim areas where there is settled population. Why has China changed its position?
I think from 2003 to roughly 5, as you mentioned, there has been an emphasis on Arunachal Pradesh in the Chinese view. And they started calling this in the official documents and in the official pronouncements as Southern Tibet. And this is partly because they say that in the 15th century, the 6th Dalai Lama came from the Tawang monastery. And so the argument basically is that since Tibet belonged to China, so Tawang should belong to Tibet and then to China. So that's a very specious argument to say that, in history, someone belonged to some territory, and so the territory belongs to the current day.
Well, by the same yardstick, if they're quoting history, then there is the 1914 Shimla Agreement, which they don't tend to agree to. So when it suits them to talk about history, and when it suits them, they tend to ignore history. General Banerjee, sir, the other part of the boundary which is disputed essentially in Ladakh, and we saw intrusions last year, there was a lot of concern in India. China tried to play it down. It was an embarrassment for China's president when he was visiting India. There is the military dimension, and China has been, though the Ministry of External Affairs says that we have a peaceful relationship, China does do a certain amount of muscle flexing. What is our ability to respond in the event of a Chinese aggression once again?
Well, actually, as you quite clearly demarcated, both in the east and in the west in Ladakh, there are different perceptions. Whereas in the east, the boundary, as I said, along the high Himalayas should be clearly delineated and generally accepted. But there again, I must say that China has been changing its position on these border alignments and acceptance of this. The 2003-2006, really a 2006 phenomena of calling the Northeast Frontier Division or Arunachal Pradesh as Southern Tibet is both mischievous and wrongly asserting its claim over the entire province. It is patently unsustainable through any legal or other earlier treaty obligations. In Ladakh, there are possibilities of 3 clear lines along which borders could have been divided. Now, in a short program like this, and without a clear understanding of the terrain features, I do not want to go into the details of these 3 separate lines. But there at least, there could be some discussion as to along which alignment the international boundary between India and China will exist. And there's scope for discussions there. Of course, the fact that China has currently occupied much of that territory after 1962 and continues to hold that is in itself a demonstration of its aggressive intent in Ladakh.
Professor Kandapalli, 2 issues and 1 quick answers. One is that China has a tradition of nibbling away at territory of its neighbors and keep making larger than life claims so that when you finally have a negotiated settlement, China comes out an advantage. And the other is that what is really the way forward in dealing with the Chinese?
You're right that there has been an expansion in the Chinese posture in both Ladakh as well as in the Arunachal Pradesh sector. But we have also seen in the central sector and in Sikkim area, which is not disputed between the two sides, we have seen some nibbling, especially in the finger point in northeast Sikkim region. So there has been an expansion in the Chinese patrolling as well as nibbling away of the territories in the closer to the McMahon line areas as well as in other sectors of the border. In terms of the second issue on what is the way forward, I think India needs to emphasize more on conventional and strategic deterrence to protect its interests on the border areas. I think it needs to enhance the strike corps deployments as well as performance of the other 4 corps which have been located in these areas. This is one measure that India can do in the immediate future. Secondly, India also needs to participate extensively in the confidence building measures between the two armed forces. Both in the army to army as well as in the Air Force section, we need to stabilize those areas for common stability in the border areas.
So clearly we've discussed the military and the boundary issues, but we'll be back after a break and look at what other measures Delhi and Beijing can adopt to move their relationship forward, particularly in the areas of trade and other bilateral diplomatic initiatives.